Turn up the dive, feel the vibe, get ready to ignite. Untold stories in the airways, flying through the night. Experience voices, tales so bold. Streaming live, the truth unfolds. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, so I remember I share and subscribe. Join the side where truth can't hide. Aliens in the attic, UFOs in the sky. Cryptids lurking, oh my, oh my. Ghosts in the hallway, whispering your name. The paranormal, the unexplained. Come a VIP, get the inside scoop. Unlock the mysteries, be part of the group. Live streaming stories, they're talking to you. Super chats buzzing, join the group. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member ride. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can hide. So if you've got the guts and you want to explore, tune into the Untold, it's what you're looking for. From aliens to ghosts and all that's unseen. Untold Radio Network, where the world's mysteries convene.
The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your host, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Greetings, all my fellow weirdos and weirdettes. Welcome to Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Dean Bertram, and as always, I'm delighted that you've decided to spend the next hour or so of your life with me, whether it's watching the show live, where it goes out on YouTube and X and Facebook every Tuesday night at 9 p.m., or maybe you're watching it on one of those platforms where it's archived afterwards, or listening from the next day onwards when it drops on almost every podcast platform on the planet. Thank you. I'm really happy to have you here. I hope you all had a great day. I hope in a way you had a better day than I did. I spent today having to go to the endodontist and then, is that what they're called? And then the dentist. I had to have a root canal done today. So it was 2 hours in one and 2 hours in another, an hour break in the middle where you're kind of apprehensive about the final stage. I've always been fascinated. This is just a quick weird aside with dentist work ever since I read the wonderful Harold Bloom's Omens of the Millennium back in the late 90s, where he talked about having, I think it was like a wisdom tooth removed or something. He had the nitrous oxide and he had a religious experience. He saw angels when he was on the dentist chair. And I remember shortly thereafter myself having to get 4 wisdom teeth removed in the chair. I didn't get put under. I was just in the chair. And I asked for, the laughing gas, the nitrous oxide. And I think my dentist was very Scroogey with the amount he gave me. I certainly had no incredible religious visions when I was on the happy gas. And I certainly afterwards never had any kind of Valis type experience like Philip K. Dick had after he'd had a dental procedure and the beginnings of some of his strange paranormal experiences of the latter years of his life began, when he was delivered, I believe, painkillers from the local pharmacy, and he had one of his first real Valis visions. Anyway, enough of that. I could talk about Valis visions and Harold Bloom's work for the rest of the night, but I'm more excited with what we're about to talk to. or who we're about to talk to for the rest of the night. Tonight's guest is a paranormal travel writer, blogger, and UFO researcher from Cape Girardeau, Missouri, who has investigated the unusual since the late 70s. He has traveled to hundreds of places in the US with his family, documenting strange locations and lost lore, building a paranormal location GPS research database with multiple thousands of locations, and has been a guest on dozens of paranormal, cryptid, and UFO-related radio programs and podcasts. He's appeared on television discussing UFOs and has been interviewed for several documentaries, including the cryptid feature MoMo, the Missouri Monster, and the On the Trail of UFOs documentary series produced by Small Town Monsters, as well as The Creature from Big Muddy. I've seen all of these. They're all great. And most recently, perhaps Grand Tower. Last year's film was called Grand Tower, UFOs and Other High Strangeness, produced by Red Room Media, which tonight's guest is, I suppose, the featured narrator as well as one of the writers of it. It's fantastic. I watched it a couple times in the lead up to this interview. I'd already watched it when it came out, and I watched it twice again this last week. It's great. If you're into the type of things we're going to be talking about tonight, he has researched the UFO mystery for over 40 years and frequently writes on issues related to reform of ufology, which I think we'll also touch on a little tonight, and improving rational methodology. He's also a UFO collector, an archivist. His writing and photography work can be found on all social media, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and on the Strange Travels blog and the occasional print media. So I'm delighted to welcome to Talking Weird somebody I've wanted to have on for a very long time, Michael Huntington.
Hello.
Greetings.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, great to be here. I've been following you for quite a long time. We've intersected, I think, in different places, across some of the same subjects, but I don't think we've really had a chance to chat or get to know each other too much. So thanks. This is great.
Man, it's great to have you here. I love your what's one of your I'm often engaged in it on Facebook. It's UFO Culture magazine.
That's a private group on Facebook that has quite a few notable researchers on there. A lot of Center for UFO Studies people, and it's just sort of just a place for people to share some like images. There's a lot of pop culture type stuff in there. That's one of my focuses, especially on social media, because I think it's undeniable that at least for the UFO subject that it's viewed entirely through cultural lenses. So you can't really escape that. And if you're studying the subject, you have to study the history, you have to study the literature, you have to study all the cultural influences that are going on for the different ages and eras and movements. I have a big picture view of ufology, which is the study of UFOs and the history and the literature and all that. There's a lot of people that are focused on like the movement aspect, the political disclosure aspect, the different camps that are trying to push it politically or within the culture in order to change the paradigm or whatever. I'm a UFO researcher, so I do have opinions on things, but I also I look at a bigger picture. I look at all of these things going on. I'm removed a little bit from a lot of people within social media because it tends to be newer, younger people that come in, and I'm like going on 50 years of research in this subject, so there's sort of a learning curves and all that, and there's different camps and groups and everything. So I navigate all these things while I share research with researchers, and I promote big picture ufology, and I promote projects and archiving and literature and all that, because I think ultimately whatever your views are going to be on different cases or theories or personalities or what the big questions are, you should at least be informed, and you should read the literature and know the history and study it from a lot of different perspectives, not just from certain believer views or even skeptic views. I do study the history and have studied the cases, and I am skeptical in some instances. I think anybody who's studied this long enough realizes that there have been hoaxes, that there have been con artists, that there have been cults and manipulative factors within a lot of these paranormal subjects that intersect. There have been cults, and there have been these things that have manipulated this subject and created these narratives, these competing narratives in these camps. That is the history of the subject. It's all of these cases and how all of this stuff interacts, and the heroes and how they come and how they go and how they rise and how they fall. I think all that's fascinating, and I think those of us that are focused on the historical aspect and the archiving and the promotion of, legitimacy for what is a multidisciplinary subject, I think deserving of even a degree. I think it's just as legitimate as, say, women's studies or African American studies. I think if something has been within American culture long enough and has, inarguably influenced the culture and the history and the politics, and it has a literature and it has movements and personalities, I think that's a subject that is worthy of study. And that's even aside from, the anomalies themselves, which are scientific mysteries. And there are questions there as to, I have a philosophy of science background. That's what I studied when I was here at Southeast Missouri State. And I focused on pseudoscience demarcation. That was sort of my emphasis there. So questions relative to, what is sufficient evidence? How do you change a paradigm? How do you have these scientific revolutions? What is sufficient to change a paradigm? What does that mean? Who are you trying to influence? Are paradigms shifted by? Are you trying to influence the public? Is it a PR thing, or are you trying to influence the consensus establishment? Because that's really, the walls that you need to knock down. So we get into these questions of, what's sufficient evidence, and how far can you speculate as to what is a stew of varietal cases, and I'm fascinated by all of it. I'm fascinated by all sorts of anomalies, UFOs, cryptids, ghosts, other paranormal things, and I focus quite a bit in my research. I'm sorry. Were you saying something? I focus quite a bit on my research on mapping, finding locations that have an anomalous aspect to them, through culture or folklore or whatever, and go beyond just probability, and to suggest something worthy of study. Because ultimately, with all of these subjects, how do you study them? How do you, they're so transient. And for me, I think ultimately we need to try to pinpoint some of these things down, localize them, and have sustained, long-term scientific study. So I promote that too. I promote scientific ufology as well as big picture ufology and reform to move away from, sort of the corrupting elements that have always plagued the subject, political influence by intelligence people and cult people and people that are con artists and people that want to exploit. That's something that we have to work through. And there's debates as to who's out there and who's good for the subject and who's bad for the subject. And I'm in the mix. I pretty much have been doing this sort of thing every day for 48 years. So it's a lifestyle thing, and I'm definitely devoted to the subject and all of these associative subjects, which is pretty much all part of the same big picture, I think.
Firstly, I'm horrified that we haven't talked before this, because you're so incredibly fascinating, and I think we've looked at some similar aspects of ufology, probably very independently, that not everybody's interested in. When I did my PhD, I did a chapter on the philosophy of science, and the way science intersects with ufology, and how
Right.
you can't understand the UFO phenomenon, or the way the UFO phenomenon was understood in the 20th century, without understanding how science intersected with it. And I
Mhm.
think there are keys within the phenomenon, within people who've studied the phenomenon itself, to perhaps help us better understand science. And Charles Ford, of course, perhaps is arguably the granddaddy of all of this. If Ray Palmer's the man who invented flying saucers, or the father of flying saucers, I was talking to Gene Steinberg about that the other day, arguably Charles Ford's the granddaddy of ufology, and he was super critical of science. In fact, you were mentioning structures of scientific revolutions before, from the great Thomas Kuhn book, but
Mhm.
Charles Ford was saying what Thomas Kuhn was, using different language, 40 years before Thomas Kuhn introduced the idea of the paradigm shift. Ford
Right.
was making it quite clear that science didn't operate the way that we're led to believe through a cultural mythology that science operates. In other words, people standing on the shoulders of others and gradually getting closer to, some idea. Fort made it very clear that the scientific institutions have very strict boxes that you can't just inject new material into. And Thomas Kuhn said of the identical thing 40 years later, that the paradigm is resistant to change. And when a paradigm collapses, it's only because it's been shattered so much. Anyway, I could go on ranting and ranting about that stuff. But maybe just because this is the first time we've got to talk. What was your first what made you want to approach this subject and spend the next 40 years plus of your life at it, like to have that kind of passion? What led you here, Michael?
Well, I don't know if your audience is familiar with like the boy ufologist sort of thing that came out of the '60s. There was a cultural thing that happened where you had like sort of like adolescent nerds, even before they were called nerds, and they were focused in on things like flying saucers. And within that group, you got all your classic uh, influencers, your writers, and all the great pulps and the magazines, of the '60s and the '70s. And uh, I was born in '69, and my mother was really into all of these things. Uh, she was into all of the Eric Von Daniken stuff. We got all of the tabloids, like all of them every week growing up, and we got all the other magazines. You got like all the UFO magazines and everything. So I grew up as an infant with this stuff around, and then anybody that's familiar with the culture of the '70s, yeah, you had the Travis Walton story. I watched all these things unfold within these tabloids, and on television you had uh, the UFO incident. That was one that I watched on TV when I was a little kid, and you had In Search Of and Project UFO, and then Close Encounters hit the theaters, and all the magazines and everything within the culture was sort of UFOs, at least for me. And I really got into that, and I get into Star Wars and science fiction. Uh, that's one thing that I tell people that are interested in UFOs, at least, that I hope that they're science fiction fans, and if they really want to study the UFO subject, you also have to study the history of science fiction. right along with it, all the way, from H.G. Wells all the way up, because these are influencers within the culture that sort of mirror each other, and they play off of each other. And there might be some answers there for people to consider, but either way, they need to know what, how people viewed what a flying saucer was. And it's different in different places at different times. And there's some cases that are good and some cases that are bad and some that are legitimate and some that are not. And, it changes over time. And I think, an honest approach to all this stuff and really getting into the history of these cases and everything is if you really want to study the subject, you have to know the subject. There's a lot of instant experts out there now, because they watched a documentary or two and then they get a podcast, and then they have the right guest or two. But there's a fundamental absence of, if you're claiming expertise, you should at least have, I think, some literary background, literary knowledge. I have a list on my on my group, of I think 500 books all ufologists should read. You're not going to read that many. But you can read a few hundred. I have a few hundred, and I think you have to study, and you have to study the history, and you have to know the cases, and that's how I got into the mapping stuff. Was really, it's a good way to know the cases. Down to a square foot. If you can position where a UFO was and a witness, I think that's a pretty good demonstration that you've researched the case adequately enough, if you're able to GPS it. But going back to the Close Encounters era, I really got into UFOs probably around 78 when Travis Walton's book came out. I had pictures of Travis Walton on my wall when I was 9 years old in 1978, and I started collecting UFO stuff and UFO books, and I had a flying saucer encounter in 1979 that sort of pushed me over the edge there a little bit, and then I joined APRO. I was a member of the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. I was a kid, so I had to write a letter saying, "Don't discriminate against me. I'm a legitimate researcher." So they let me in, and I was a member at a couple of different times. Recently, my friend Dave Marler was able to find some of my APRO materials in the lost APRO files at the National UFO Historic Records Center. I had made a report from my sighting in 1979, and he has it. He has like a drawing that I made from when I was a kid back then. So, and he's got my membership things from back then as well. So when I say that I'm APRO old, I can pull out some bona fides to say that I've been around that long, and corresponding with people. Back then we wrote via mail, and our internet was maybe the UFO Audio Visual Clearinghouse or one of the UFO news clipping services. I got all that stuff every month. I ordered different things. I got UFO encyclopedias and as many UFO books as I could back when I was a kid. I was sort of obsessive compulsive. I would take Ronald D. Story's UFO encyclopedia and record it into a tape recorder.
Wow. So
that I can memorize it. And I was also obsessive compulsive about astronomy back then too. I would copy astronomy books and everything, page by page. Wow. I don't know where that comes from. I'm sure some experiencers will say, it's a connection to my UFO experiences or whatever. But no, I went to college. I came down here to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, which has UFO history like you would not believe. It's where Project Identification, Dr. Harley Rutledge's first university scientific field study, was conducted from. So I came down here. Cape Girardeau also has a UFO crash tale that predates Roswell from 1941. There's been several books. So I got that, that interesting lore. I got Dr. Harley Rutledge, with his study down here, the UFO hotspot. I come from St. Louis originally, which is, where MUFON got its start, out of the St. Louis Flying Saucer Clubs. I remember back then, when we had those. And I was a member of MUFON back in the 80s and the 90s as well. And over the years, I moved away from them at times under, different administrations, as you could understand, as they move more towards entertainment as opposed to science. I still, I've tried to promote through UFO reform, a hashtag over the past 10 years. I've lobbied all the different groups. I've been to like SCU in Huntsville, and I've lobbied people there, and I've gone to a lot of different conferences as I travel around and document anomalous locations. And I encourage, a move away from the celebrity culture and a move more towards grassroots science, a move away from the intelligence influencing. I think I've said this before. I think when you have people like Luis Elizondo, who has called for the death of ufology, and to wait for the old ufologists to die, when you have somebody like that, who is an IC guy, saying that, it just speaks volumes as to how clueless he is about the subject.
I could not agree more. We did a piece on the Untold Radio Network, another show I used to do on this with Jason McLean. We used to do a show called Mysterious Library, and we did a piece just on that article. And everything that Elizondo was suggesting in that article was the things which had destroyed ufology originally. You know what I mean? The idea that we have to trust the scientific establishment, we have to just have intelligence people involved. I'm thinking, didn't we learn anything from the Condon? Like the Condon report? Like the history of ufology has been plagued by the type of things Elizondo was suggesting. Didn't we learn anything from the Benowitz affair? Didn't we learn anything from all of these times where the institutions were controlling the narrative? I mean, it's the last thing we want.
Yeah. And mostly a lot of these folks are just not ufologists. I've met Luis Elizondo in person, and, he was clueless about Hestelin when I talked to him. And I was like, you're promoting like field, and you don't know what, how could you not know that, this was back when I met him at SCU, and they had just promoted like the 1952, like that video of the Washington Nationals. He was promoting that in a speech as like legit footage. And it's like, no, man, if you're going to be up there promoting the subject, I think you should know the subject and care for the subject. And I think a lot of those people are, they're within that niche, that Mirage Men, Hal Puthoff, sort of spook trough niche that's been around, since SRI back in the 70s, right? And they're used to that. They're used to that, that pork, so to speak, whether it's from Bigelow, government, OSAP, whatever. And that's what they want. And I think they're sort of moving a lot of these IC people also are connected to like firms that deal with like security and drones, so we're seeing a blurring of the drone issue, and we're seeing a blurring of the term UFO, into UAP, which is a sort of amorphous thing that military can put whatever they want into it. And these people that are promoting a lot of this, they work for these firms, they work for these companies. It's sort of like it's like a lobbying that is kind of like off the books. They're defense lobbying, but they don't have to be sunshine about it because they can just call themselves a science interest technology interest group. So there's a lot of stuff going on there, and ultimately there's a disconnect, and ultimately I think there's a co-opting, and they're trying to change the nomenclature, and they're trying to change what things mean, and they're blurring it with this drone stuff because there is a concern, and these people are invested in that, and I think they definitely are promoting, a joint all domain command and control thing for our skies. And it's understandable because, I mean, look at what's going on in like Ukraine right now, right? That sort of drone warfare is what's coming. And also what's coming is the skies are going to be filled with drones. They're going to be filled with delivery drones and robot drones, and that's what's coming. So they're going to have to partition the sky, and they're going to have to control it, and they're going to have to lock it down. So I think that's what a lot of this IC machination stuff is to get all the reports, to turn everybody into little brother and siphon all these things to the government, which the problem is traditionally you cannot trust any of them.
Absolutely.
Because they don't tell the truth. They will tell you that they lie by omission, at least, right? They can never be totally transparent, which is why I believe in UFOs. People see UFOs. They are things that are unidentified in the sky that people don't know what they are. A lot of times we do know what they are, but UFOs are real. What they are, in some instances, they could be extreme alien or whatever. In some instances, they're probably government stuff, but we're talking like 5% of all cases, or a very small percentage. And then even within that 5%, half of those are just low information. Well, really, all of them are low information, because if we had all the information, we would know what they were. If we could identify a UFO, it's not a UFO anymore. So there are extreme possibilities. The alien stuff, interdimensional, all that stuff is possible and exists and could exist. But the military is interested in all that stuff. That's flying in the skies that they want to identify, and there are mysteries there, and I think we have to look at everything case by case within the subject. And I don't think the military is going to give you the answers. I mean, even their own efforts, Aero, UAPTF, all that stuff. OSAP. I mean, we're just now getting like the Bigelow papers and stuff coming out, right? I mean, they could have done that in 2017. I think when it's manipulated, and then you're seeing these people making money, and you're seeing them on TV, and and then they mix the patriotism stuff into it. It's like, how could you be against a veteran? I've gone to conferences where I've been physically threatened by some of these guys, and that's the culture out there, because he thought I said something on Facebook or X or something, and it's like, anybody who knows me, I mean, I'm provocative, but I'm not going to insult you, but you're seeing that, and you've seen that, and that's why people have distanced themselves, along with a lot of those people just not knowing the subject. That recent, all that, the chandelier stuff, and the saucer in the field stuff. Real researchers recognize that stuff immediately. I know this because I was one of those guys that found the chandelier, and I was one of those guys that found that circle. I was there, and I'm a real researcher, and real researchers, they want the details. Whenever I see a picture or a video online and people are like, oh, UFO Michigan, I'm like, that's a state. How does that help anything? And it's just, there's like 20 things that I need. I need time, date, location, GPS, direction, elevation. I need the witness. I'm one of those people. I don't believe in anonymous witnesses, because how can you have providence of evidence? How can you have evidence provenance without, if somebody's testimony is part of the evidence, then you need to be able to check the veracity, make sure they're not like a professional con artist. There's sort of a move to have anonymous, just pictures where everything's just blurred out by the government and you don't know who said it, where, or whatever. It's just, it's like Syria. It's like, that's not evidence of anything. That's manipulation. That's instilling fear. I look at all the fear that the drone stuff was, in New Jersey that they were doing. It all came from UFO people, UAP advocates on like News Nation. And then the year before, they did the same thing with those Chinese balloons, right? And then they mixed, UAP. It's
Right.
it's all the same thing. And it's like, no, there's a lot of junk in the sky. There's always been a lot of junk in the sky. There's always been balloons. There's always been drones. There's always been rockets. There's always been misidentifications and all that. It's, people need to learn these things and realize, when you turn on television, and it's media, you're being manipulated, largely. You have to really be careful. I pull out the old X-Files. I was an original X-Files member, first season X-Files member. I signed up for the X-Files fan club by mail. Trust no one. Really, trust no one. Judge things using critical thinking, measured responses. Don't believe what you hear. Check what you hear. Check the evidence, and don't draw conclusions. You can have provisional things and you can be speculative, but I think there's so many people that are just on these narratives. They just have these belief narratives, and you're seeing like everything sort of put together, and you're seeing like a deification of the phenomena, as a singular sort of thing. It becomes anthropomorphized. And I think even Vallée has talked about, that's problematic. It comes from Jacques Vallée and Keel, the idea that, there might be some sort of paranormal unity aspect to a lot of these things. But, I interact with a lot of people, and it sort of gets culty, and it's like, the phenomena will only reveal what it allows. It's like, and then they mix their, their consciousness cultism into that. And it's worrisome. It's frightening. I've been around long enough to remember things like Heaven's Gate and some of those people. I've been around some cults. I've been around people with mental illness. If you're in any of these paranormal subjects, let's cut to the chase. Let's cut to the reality. There are some people with mental issues. And a lot of times, I think there's some bad reinforcement by some bad players, especially, when it gets into the exploitation aspect of it. So, we've said for years we have to police ourselves, and we do that by pointing things out and asking questions and seeing if that's the way to look. And I play devil's advocate a lot, but I'm gonna keep doing what I do. I'm this is my lifestyle. This is my my subjects, and I'm just gonna keep doing it and try to influence people and towards a positive thing.
I quickly have to give a shout out to Horace Smith, who's Professor Emeritus of Astronomy and Physics at Michigan State University. He asked the question before you actually you talked about Professor Rutledge's project identification study of Missouri UFOs. So it goes to show how switched on some of our audience is, particularly Horace, that he was aware of that. I did have a question for you myself, Michael. I have several questions, but one of them is, when we're talking about the the Keel and the Valet type interpretation of the UFO phenomenon being perhaps inadequately dealt with by taking an ETH or an extraterrestrial hypothesis type approach to it, that it seems to be something perhaps beyond that tin can from space with little green men in it. I found it particularly interesting. I know I can tell by talking to you how much attention you pay. The media never really picked up on it, but it was so interesting to me that so many people who were front and center in the disclosure effort, or whatever we want to call it, from 2017 onwards, both the journalists who were pushing it, so people like Leslie Keane or Tucker Carlson as two very different examples, or the people who seem to be embroiled in it, whether that be Grush or whether that be Tom DeLonge or whether that be Hal Puthoff, that all of these people were beginning to suggest that this thing wasn't extraterrestrial, that there was another intelligence and it was something else, perhaps spiritual or perhaps interdimensional, but they were all pushing away from that ETH interpretation. And the media never really caught up with that. But to me, it was fascinating that some of these key movers and shakers were saying it's not ET, it's something else. What's your kind of takeaway on that?
Yeah, I think within at least like UFO and paranormal culture over the past like 30 years, there's been a move from the extraterrestrial hypothesis that there are space beings from other civilizations on other worlds that are traveling the distance to get here, however they're doing it. And the idea has been sort of morphed a lot of different ways over the decades into the notion that somehow they're already here. And they're either here somewhere in the earth hidden, like, like in a civilization underground or in the water, somewhere that we can't see. They're a crypto civilization, one that's like a lost Atlantis, like Wakanda or something. That was around for a long time. I mean, it goes back to, Shaver and pulp science fiction, the notion of underground, even, H.G. Wells' Selenites, inside of the moon, we can go back throughout science fiction and see these ideas of, underground civilizations. Comic books and films are filled with all this stuff. Jules Verne, is filled with all this stuff. But as we move in, like into the esoteric age, and then perhaps into the the new age hippie era, where a lot of different new ideas are being put forward. The idea of different realities and different dimensions, like coinciding, like together within space. Maybe occupying the same space. That became popular. I think a lot of it came out of like the ghost, spiritual ghost research. The idea that there is an invisible metaphysical realm, a realm of consciousness, of beings, identities, souls, whatever, intelligences, and that was sort of, it's very compatible with religion, the idea of soul and afterlife and all that. But as you move into, the Keel and Valet era, we have this idea that perhaps everything's sort of connected to maybe a few intelligences that somehow can manipulate from this place that's here, and manipulate not just reality, but perception and human perception. And their interests are perhaps us. We don't know what their agendas are. Maybe they're tricksters. Maybe they're angels. Maybe they're demons. Maybe they're beings from the future. We have all these different speculative ideas that can coincide and coalesce with religious views, and also cult narratives and conspiracy narratives, especially within the UFO world. So yeah, there is a disclosure as narrative that has that that has sprung out of uh, the Bigelow crowd, the Hal Puthoff crowd. I think Bigelow cannot be denied as being an influence. His mixture of the spiritual and the UFO stuff, he was paying the bills for a lot of these people that are, that around, that whole new thinking aloud crowd. A lot of those people were recipients of, Bigelow's uh, funding and were part of a lot of these different projects. So there is like a narrative viewpoint within this culture around like Puthoff and a lot of these guys, Valet and SRI, and these remote viewers that go to like Monroe and Esalen, and these are communities. These are camps, one of many that interact with each other and influence each other, and that's what's behind a lot of the UAP politics, is also this view, these viewpoints, these belief systems that I promote depoliticization of ufology. In fact, I say depoliticize ufology. I think I'm going to have some T-shirts made, because when you bring it into it, ultimately it's if you bring it into government, for one, they're not authorities. You can't trust them or whatever. And the purpose is always going to be spending. It's always going to be, who can make the money off of this? And there's tens of millions of dollars being spent on this subject. And it's going to these, these firms and these people. And I think it's really not been discovered yet that there are like ritual belief systems connected to what they do. And there might be issues if, our tax dollars are going towards, like CE5. Is that scientific? Is that a religious ritual? Are we promoting like a proto-religion? Even Valet has worried about this. I think he's mentioned this, that, you have to worry about it becoming a proto-religion. And it's frightening, especially somebody who has studied like history, go back to Nazi Germany and look at some of the influences there that were sort of twisted by some of those influencers, I think. It's telling when people like Alex Jones, or even just today, has said that Lou Elizondo is like, not legit. Like, he's like Q level. And it's like, if you're getting called Q level by Alex Jones, then, maybe it's something that needs to be looked at.
And how, when you approach, for example, your most recent documentary, which again I watched and I really enjoyed, as you would tell me before, though it's directed by somebody else, but you co-wrote it, Grand Tower UFOs and Other High Strangeness. When you're looking at that on the ground, it seems to, that film in many ways seems to validate a lot of what people like Keel and Valet and Patrick Harper and others are saying about so much of this phenomenon somehow being interconnected. And especially Keel, his idea was there was one phenomena or one phenomenon, and there was all these different, aspects which appeared as different phenomena, but he always wanted to get to the root. And when you watch that film, it seems to me, at least when I'm watching it, to be echoes of that Keelian idea that all of these things might be stemming from this same source: UFOs, Bigfoot, hauntings, whatever.
Well, it comes up because, I look for these hot spots, right? Places that are like, that have like a little bit of everything, but maybe too much, right? It's got cryptids and haunted places and cursed places and weird electromagnetic anomalies and UFOs and other sort of just strange urban legends that make it interesting. It's at least interesting to me to document, so that it doesn't get lost, so that I go there to some of these places and photograph, just so it doesn't get lost, because places get, destroyed, and especially rural places, which is a lot of places that I do. But yeah, there is the Keel and Valet notion of, some sort of singular paranormal cause. But that can be biasing, especially if you think that cause is an intelligence, right? Because if you consider it an intelligence, then you anthropomorphize it. And if it's got powers that you don't, then it's easy to deify it after that, and that's when you sort of get, these problems here. I think you can look at places and you can see that statistically they are more anomalous than others. And we do need to try to figure out what's going on and not just speculate that it's a singular intelligence cause, because I think that's a biased interpretation. That's, you need a lot of conditions to be verified before you get to that. But I think it can be demonstrated that there are places that maybe it's connected to the environment. Maybe it's connected to electromagnetic from the ground. Maybe there's some sort of geological aspect that maybe can induce hypnagogic hallucinations. It may happen over here and not happen over here. That's why I don't like these singular things. You may, and I think I can demonstrate this, that there's a place in Florida where it has 3 spook-like lower tails around it, like in a pyramid. If you study it, you can see that it's literally a phosphorus mine, right? So there's probably some sort of natural cause to this. That's why I think every case, every haunted house, every ghost, every Bigfoot, every UFO, every single one is its own mystery. They may not be connected to each other at all. There may be as many answers to these as there are mysteries. I think it's demonstrable that we can know what a lot of them are. I think the fact that you can solve some shows that they cannot all be one thing. That's just logic, which means that, it's probably a variety of things. And the supposition that it's a singular intelligence thing hasn't necessarily been demonstrated, unless you get into the high strangeness cases and you get into the narratives, and that's a whole other thing. But I'm interested in locations to minimize, the transient nature and try to localize phenomena for study. I do haunted stuff mostly because they're the least transient. Haunted house stays there. Bigfoot is hard to catch. I mean, you can go there a week after he's been there, and UFOs may come or go. Spook lights might be a little more of a common thing, but I think a lot of those are optical illusions. I think certain gravity hills are optical illusions. And it's not to be a buzzkill. It's like each of these mysteries are great. Each of them have their own probabilities and likelihoods and answers. And I like truth. I'm fascinated with hoaxes. I'm fascinated with the bunk. I'm fascinated with the contactees and the con artists and all that. It's part of a big picture, but
Part of the pattern, I think, Jim.
Yeah, but just to say something quickly, there could be an invisible trickster from another dimension that manipulates human beings as well, that is interested in human sexuality or human spiritual or psychic development or whatever. Prove it, right? It would come down to that, but fascinating either way.
It sure is. We had a question from Squatch Mama, who asks, Mr. Huntington, with thousands of locations in your paranormal GPS database, have you noticed any patterns or connections between these hotspots?
Well, pretty much it's kind of hard to say that, because we have this idea of a hotspot, you know. I mean, you see like these lists of like, oh, Montana's a hotspot. It's like, that's a state. That's not a hotspot. Hotspot is, you know, like a position, you know, like a park, a location, a town, you know, something like that. And people sort of get these ideas of, you know, when you have like a sighting wave or a flap, you know, they think that, you know, that it's consistent. Really, a hotspot is a place that has sustained and consistent claims of UFOs. Or if we want to, you know, have this window view, I map everything, because I think it's interesting when a haunted house is built on top of of like an Indian mound. I think that might be something, you know. I think if people are seeing spook lights at, you know, a location where, you know, a plane crashed, that's interesting, you know. What causes that, you know, things like that. Those are the things I map, and you can see a lot of those sort of off the beaten path of places on my Instagram. I got like 1,000 pictures up there of a lot of
just quickly too, because it fascinated me in the documentary, is there was talk about the 37th parallel running through, for example, the Grand Tower location and other locations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, that's an idea that's been put forward in some books and a few TV shows. It's basically an extension of an idea that's been around for decades, if not longer. You know, of ley lines, that they're the idea that there is some sort of you know, interlaced grid that crosses the United or the world, and at different spots you can see, you know, historic locations or paranormal places or whatever. And the 37th parallel, which is, you know, is a line that goes across the United States. There, you can look along there and you can see, you know, some interesting locations, haunted spots, UFO locations, cattle mutilations. I think the Marley Woods is along there, you know, where all the Grand Tower and the other 73 wave stuff took place, but all along there. But I think that you can find patterns anywhere. Really, the patterns that I found is, you know, there has to be people around to witness it. So, you know, if you lay over, you know, you take a map and put these locations, it's going to correspond where people are at, because people have to be there to experience things and report them. As far as hotspots, small towns, limestone maybe in the ground, running water. There are certain attributes that are interesting. Springs, you know. There at Marley Woods, Grand Tower, different places, Skinwalker Ranch. There's the idea that maybe this either creates a condition that allows, you know, maybe a veil between realities to lessen, or maybe at these places there is some sort of portal or something, and things can come through from other realities or whatever, or there's something environmental that is affecting how people perceive things, or in some of these small towns, just folklore, you know, urban legend that stems from you know, some baloney. There's a lot of that. I've investigated quite a few UFO crashes around here in 1950 that were sort of like a part of an organized thing by the JCs. All the different groups were having contests to have these saucer crashes. You know, there's these cultural things in there that we have to be keyed in on, I think, to understand some of these big pictures.
We have a question from a good friend of the show who's been a guest a number of times, and a very good friend of mine who also appears in my upcoming documentary, The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers, who was my tour guide when I was in Maury Island. And that's the wonderful paranormal researcher, author, and musician Bob Antone. And he asks, I know nothing about this, but you very well may, Michael. What do you know about the Voyager transmission as of late, the humanoid face appearing to scientists?
Well, I saw something about that on X, Twitter. I sort of was engaged in other things, but you see a lot of things like that. You know, these pseudo news things. You really have to track a lot of this stuff down, and I don't have too much other than I've heard it out there, but I don't hold. I think if it something like that actually did happen, I think it would be bigger. I'm pretty plugged into the UFO, live pulse, and none of the legitimate, even the UAP disclosure people aren't looking at that as anything legitimate. It might be out of that realm out there, the internet, that just is doing the AI stuff and going crazy and making feeder phones and just trying to get as many clicks and sell clickbait on the side. I don't know, whatever.
I have one more question for you before we wind down, and that's because I know so many people on the Untold Radio Network are interested in Bigfoot. What's your take on those accounts where Bigfoot is seen in the vicinity of UFOs or in the same report as UFOs, or what? I mean, what have you learnt from your decades of study, or what's the takeaway, do you think, there?
Well, it's the same sort of thing. It's an unusual, anomalous claim that sort of just takes hold of a small community for a while, right? And then I've looked at like the Murfreesboro mud monster over here, which is right. It was seen, near Grand Tower during all the UFO stuff that we talk about in the documentary. I don't know. I don't think every Bigfoot or every cryptid is equal. I think some cases are more interesting than others. I think Murfreesboro, the events in the 70s and the 80s were interesting. It's along Mississippi and Ohio riverways. There's a lot of intricate, irrigation stuff going on. So things can move around. It's still pretty rural in a lot of these areas. It's interesting. I've met people that have seen Bigfoot, and you can only take their claims just on their claims. But I think out of all of the anomalous subjects, I think there's probably more evidence for some sort of upright hominid in certain parts of North America than there are for UFOs or ghosts or sea monsters, because you have hair and tissue samples and dermal ridges and all these other sort of things that are scientific in nature. Ultimately, you're going to need a body, right, or some sort of serious tissue, or something that goes beyond just the photographic evidence or an extraordinary claim on a TV show. Science is going to need something that they're going to have to study, that they're going to need to study. And that's UFOs, ghosts. I think we need ghosts in bottles. We need to get more Ghostbustery. I think long term, turn the lights on, set up scientific equipment instead of filming one night yourself in green so you can create content. That you need to move away from that if you're being legitimate. Lock a place down and put some cameras there, and if there's legitimate stuff going on. I've been to hundreds of places and I've experienced all sorts of things. I've seen UFOs, I've experienced ghosts, I've seen amazing stuff. The most common paranormal stuff, I think, is like synchronicities and just things that just the old shrimp plate sort of thing from uh, from Repo Man. It's that's the most common thing, and that leads to questions of chaos theory and you know do we exist in a controlled system? Do we exist in a simulation? All that stuff. That's the philosophical, stuff that uh, I think people embrace too much as not speculative, and you got to watch out for the belief stuff. And anyway.
No, I'll be honest. I myself am a sucker for that, and I often wonder if perhaps the meaning of all of these things, whether it's UFOs or ghosts or Bigfoot or Blessed Virgin Mary sightings or whatever, if it isn't somehow to inject some pattern into this perhaps simulation that we're living in, or even just this normal reality, there isn't some deeper significance of the purpose of these things, that perhaps the purpose isn't their existence, that perhaps the purpose is to show us that reality isn't exactly what we think reality is. But again, that drifts into the philosophical, and we can all have a bet each way when it comes to this. And I was only talking to Rick Hilberg the other day as well, who is a frequent contributor to your private UFO. What is it called? UFO magazine.
UFO Culture magazine. It's not like a magazine. It's just more of an homage to to the old days. I share stuff that I collect, and other people share interesting stuff that's cultural oriented, more so than news or disclosure bombardment.
But no, Rick was just saying the other day in an interview I did with him for the film, he was saying that, they thought back when they were the 10 ufologists of the 1960s that they'd get to the bottom of this, they'd solve the problem, lickety split. But he said, I don't think we're ever going to solve the problem. And I've thought that for a long time myself. I don't think we're ever going to solve this. But But it was a great joy having you on the show. So wonderful. How do people get a hold of what you're up to? Feel free to point them at anything at all, Mike.
Well, if you want to check out Grand Tower UFOs and Other High Strangeness, just go up to Tubi. It's free to watch, and that's a great thing. No, I am pretty active on Facebook and Instagram and X. I do a lot of sharing with researchers. I did a project last year with some folks at the Center for UFO Studies where I shared a song of the day, and we built a 6-volume sort of proto bibliography of flying saucer and alien related music. And this year I'm doing an archiving project. I'm sharing stuff that I collect. And I'm getting new stuff every day. So I got a certain budget to get certain things, and I'm trying to teach some of the new people out there that they don't need to go to a contact in the desert or follow who Tom DeLonge likes. Just get some UFO materials, books, magazines, and research. Study UFOs. You don't need anybody's permission. You don't need the government's permission. You don't need politicians' permission. You don't even need other UFO people's permission. But it's out there. There's resources out there. There's so much out. There's hundreds of, you collect this stuff. You read this stuff. There's scholarship out there. There's literature out there. There's a history out there beyond just beliefs and our views and our opinions and our politics.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think one of the most important things you were talking about tonight is that there is this terrible ahistorical approach to ufology today, that people think they can just read a 2017 New York Times, front page article, right, and they understand everything, or they can watch a congressional hearing and they're up to date. But this is a very long ongoing phenomenon, and you can argue it goes back even before 1947. You can argue it goes back a very long time, and to just jump into it and think, oh, I know everything because I read an article or two and watched a documentary or two, it's problematic. I absolutely loved speaking with you tonight. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, so thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you. And I'm just a talker. I will rattle on. I got UFO brain for a half a century, so I appreciate everybody bearing with me and helping me with my my UFO OCD.
And we're going to be back on again sometime soon. And until I talk to you again, Michael, hopefully very soon, and until I talk to everybody else, which will be the same weird time, same weird channel, next Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Central on the Untold Radio Network, please keep it weird.